It's an amazing story about Alexander the Great, who was walking among his troops one evening. He came across a guy who was supposed to be on guard duty, but he was sound asleep, leaning against the wall. So Alexander the Great reached down, grabbed him, stood him to his feet, and shook him and said, "Soldier, what is your name?" Now, the man was not only asleep, but he was drunk. So he staggered it out. He goes, "Alexander, sir." Bam! Alexander the Great hit him in the face, dropped him to the ground. He reached out and said, "Soldier, get up." And this time, now sobered by the blow, now a little bit more alert, he stood to his feet, tried to stand his attention, tried to get himself together, and Alexander the Great said, "Soldier," face to face, about 6 inches from his nose, "what is your name?" And the soldier had to say his name. It was Alexander. And he said, "Alexander, sir." Bam! Alexander the Great hit him in the face and dropped him to the ground. Now this guy is woozy, not from the alcohol, not from the sleep, but from being hit twice in the face. And Alexander the Great says, "Get up, soldier." And now the soldier knows what's coming. He knows what he has to do. He stands at as much attention as he can with his broken, bloody nose. And Alexander the Great said, "Soldier, what is your name?" And the man just looks down at the ground, knows it's inevitable, and says, "Alexander, sir." Bam! Alexander the Great hits him in the face and drops him once again to the ground. As he hits the ground, Alexander the Great steps over the man's body, points to him and says, "Soldier, change your name or change your life," and walked away. You know, it's moments like that when I think of men like Alexander the Great, and there are good parts and bad parts to him, but one thing that's certain of him, he was a man who knew who he was, knew what his task was, and actually took on his role as a leader. We actually call that taking on the part of you as a man that is a king. Now, it's interesting, I'm not going to ever recommend that you as kings punch guys in the face, but I will say this, that if you believe that you are what you're supposed to be as a king, and I don't mean somebody who rules over other people and makes them do what they have to do, but rather be the kind of man that when we are involved in any situation, we servant lead, okay? When we do that with high integrity, high moral ground, we can say what Alexander the Great said. If you're going to use my name, then make your life match it. You know, some of us name the name of Christian. You know what that's from, right? Christ. If you're going to take that name, then your life has to match it. Otherwise, change your name. I think that what we're going to deal with over the next few weeks together will help us to see some things so clearly. We're actually going to enter the mind of a man. Remember the core? We have body and soul, spirit, shadow, self, mind. In the mind, I want you to imagine, if you would, it's like a closet. And in the closet, there's all this junk on the floor. All of it's good. I mean, it's just your stuff in the closet. You've not organized it. Spandex males basically have closets of their minds full of cluttered stuff. And really, when they need it, don't know what to grab, don't know how to pull what off of what shelf. We're going to actually organize it into 4 shelves. The shelves are king, lover, warrior, friend. We're going to organize that for everything that you need as a man. Everything that you're going to need to help you do life effectively as a man is going to be on one of those shelves. So what we're going to do is we're going to think through those. Now, today we're just going to talk about king. The king is such an interesting thing because when we think about king, we basically think this is where all the glory is and everything else. But man, I want you to think differently. I want you to think about king as a crisis management situation. I want you to think about the fact that basically kings are kings, not when things are going good. Kings are needed when things are in disarray. And so there's this opportunity that we have whenever a crisis comes for us to say, you know what, we can come in and care for a situation. Now, everything about us has to be dealt with here as to whether or not we take the moral high ground or the low ground. Because kings are kings in crisis. They are. The question is not whether or not they'll be a king in the crisis. The question is, will they at that moment change history in such a way for a positive or negative? And it's all about what you have on the shelf of your mind in the king area. So we're going to walk through that together. I think it'll help us to understand this. We understand that crisis management is basically what we're going to call king thinking. And king thinking is, as a way of life, as you do life, you sort of realize, you know what, I'm preparing for such a moment as this. Had one of these moments with my youngest son, who was 16 at the time, and he had this like blew up over something that was really actually fairly minor. He had 2 conflicts in his schedule. He had committed to 2 different events and had missed the fact that he had committed to them. And he just was carrying on and just really behaving in a way that just really wasn't very pleasant. So I said to him, "Yeah, dude, what's up?" He told me what happened. I go, "Come on, knock it off. It's nothing serious." And he goes, "Why? That's what you do when you get mad, Dad." Yeah, I was really excited about him and did a little Alexander the Great. Right? No, I didn't. But one of the things that happens at that moment with Seth was he's saying, "Dad, I'm watching you. I'm watching you. And I can imitate you." Now, the bad news is he was imitating how I handle minor crisis. Minor crisis is so often when I show myself not to be the king I should be. Do okay in major ones. Don't handle minor ones very well. You got to learn to handle every crisis, manage it on every level, whatever it comes at. But the good part about the moment I had with Seth was he was also saying, "Dad, I'm watching you. I'm going to imitate you," which means that if he can imitate me when I do wrong, he will also imitate my nobility, right? My moral high ground. So we're going to learn how to create within us as guys this area that when people watch us, they go, "Wow, I need to be around you. I feel safe. I feel valued." So take your books and look at the moral high ground. What distinguishes the king from others? What's going to distinguish you and I from everybody else? Now, the king holds himself to a higher standard, and his standards are not up for a vote. I want to talk for a moment about women and the role of king in the heart of a woman. Women need us to have standards that are accurate, consistent, safe, noble. Whenever Lynn feels safe with me, everything changes. When she can curl up in my arms. You know, there were times in our marriage where Lynn did not feel safe with me, not because I was abusive. I know some of you struggle with that. Not because I would physically do something, but I could verbally do some things that would kind of control her, and I can let her feel like if she got too close to me, it was either going to involve me being involved with her sexually so she can never find herself safe in my arms, literally physically, or more importantly, that her heart couldn't trust it. And you know what? For years I thought it was just because, she was just not liking my style of whatever, but you know what she was struggling with? The consistency of my heart. Whatever woman you're involved with, I trust that if you're not married, that the woman you're involved with is a woman that you are protecting your heart. And if you are married, you are protecting her heart. One woman, right? One of the things that we do as men is, remember I told you one of the good ruts to be in is you only have sex with one woman? One of the things we need to learn is to practice nobility across the board with all, but value or protect the heart of one. So as we think this through as kings, I want you to think in terms of how does a woman respond to a king? So consider this. When we write down the concept that he holds himself at a higher standard and his standard is not up for vote, when we write that down, it basically means you're not following the crowd. It doesn't matter. If the wrong is popular, you don't do it, right? I think so often we sell out ourselves. We sell out standards that leave the women in our lives very, very vulnerable. And as a result of that, it's because we've played this game for so long. One time there was a guy sitting at a banquet, and across from him was this incredibly beautiful woman. The man was very, very wealthy. And in his wealth, he could sort of control the world around him. He was also a man of interesting character. At one point, he leaned across to this beautiful woman and said, "Ma'am, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." She blushed, looked down, looked around, came back up and looked at him and smiled, and she goes, "Thank you very much." And he goes, "Matter of fact, you are so beautiful. I was wondering if you'd be willing to spend the night with me for $100,000. Now, I know there's been a movie made about this whole concept with Robert Redford and Demi Moore, and it was $1 million there. But basically, the story as I've heard it in Texas was a story about this man leaning across the table saying, "Hey, would you spend the night with me for $100,000? The woman looked down at the floor, looked around, blushed, dabbed her face with her napkin, and then finally looked him in the eye and said, $100,000? He goes, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Yes, I would." And then he leaned across the table and he said, "Would you do it for $10? And she pushed away from the table. She goes, "What kind of woman do you think I am?" He says, "Man, we've already established what kind of woman you are. Now we're just dickering on the price." You know what he's saying at that moment? He's saying this, that if your standards are up for sale, it's just a matter of finding the right price tag. I don't know whether his intent at that moment was noble or not noble, but the results were extremely noble. The lesson that we need to learn as men is our standards are not up for sale. You need to know what is a non-negotiable in your life, what principle you're going to live by. 15 of them we give you. You need to think in terms of what are they as a way of life. Those standards cannot be moved. That's a king standard. Look at B. He commits himself to doing it right the first time. Basically, I want you to think in terms of with women that I am not about to have a redo of a marriage or redo of this relationship. I'm going to do it right the first time. Now, I know some of you by now are in enough relationships where your kingship has been in question enough because you might be on your second, third marriage. You've had multiple relationships, a lot of broken hearts. You've done a lot of those things. And what happens is we're not doing it right the first time because in our mind we get to redo it. Guys, because it's crisis management, kingship, you don't get a redo. You got to come in ready to do. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get second chances. God's a great God of second chances. It means you have a mental attitude of, I'm not going to try this. I'm going to do this. Because that's what a king does. That's what standards do. That's what nobility does. That's what rises us to the top of the chart. So you pull from the shelf of your mind the fact that not only am I going to have standards, but I'm not going to try to get it right. I'm going to get it right, which means you're going to practice. You're going to be focused. See, Lynn does not need me to try to be a good husband. That's cool. It helps. Trust me, where I used to be compared to where I am now, I would have gone a long way. But where she really needs me to be is be a good husband, right? A king needs to be a king so that when the crisis comes, he can manage it well. So when my son was saying to me, hey, Dad, this is the way you act when you are in the middle of a little crisis, I listened to that well, and I thought, you know what? I got to change that. I'm going to change that so that I'm doing it right in the little crisis, not just the big one. Look at letter C. It says this. He has empathy for people, but not their excuses. Guys, you got to value people in their struggles. Some of you right now are sitting next to a guy who has messed up more than you have. And if you guys are all sitting around in a prison environment, you know what that means? It means that, okay, I've done this, but this guy's actually done worse than I have. I want you to understand that there's a reason why we did what we did. There always is. The question is not about what happened. That's empathy, understanding the process. And some of the horrible things we've done in life, there's even reasons with them. But they're never excuses. They're not excuses. So guys, kings don't make excuses for themselves, but they have empathy for their people. High standard, they're going to do it right the first time. They will have empathy, but they will not tolerate excuses. You cannot afford to tolerate excuses and be a strong leader. So when that shelf, there's that concept of king is pulled from the shelf of your mind, keep this in mind. We are going to set a standard. We are going to do what's right. We're going to get it right the first time, and we will understand what you're going through, but we will not tolerate excuses. So when you say, I messed up, I've blown it, and I need to correct it, that's where we start to do king-like behavior, and that's what kings expect from those around us. Look at Roman numeral 2. What are the beliefs of the king? Okay? We know what distinguishes us. What do we believe? What is realistic and truthful often contradicts the forest's influence. Write down that word influence. The influence of the forest. Remember, we used the illustration of a forest? Imagine if you had this big property, and on this property you had a whole bunch of trees. It was your property, right? You're driving into your property one day, and during the night, a storm had blown over a tree. Would you say, I no longer have access to my property because I have a tree blocking the way? No, you would move it. You would get out a chainsaw, you would chop that tree up, you would use the path, right? What you and I need to do is the same thing with the forest around us. We use the term forest because it helps us understand, I think a little bit clearer, life, culture, the world around us. You are not going to let it dictate to you, even though it wants to make you go a certain direction. You're going to resist that. You and I are going to go off of standards. So what distinguishes us is one thing. What are the beliefs? We're going to be realistic and truthful, which often contradicts the forest influence. So if the whole world around you is lying, you tell the truth. Look at B. As long as he is alive, his life has purpose. As long as he's alive, just so you know, if you're breathing, there's a reason why you're breathing. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Passion of the Christ that Mel Gibson did, but did this amazing portrayal of the last days of Christ's life. There's a scene where he walks into Pontius Pilate, who's the sort of the military government leader of the day from Rome. And in that scene, Pontius Pilate has within his power the very life of Jesus Christ. I mean, he's there. He's in control of the situation. But Jesus Christ is such a man that he bends the force, is not bent by the force. And so what Christ ends up doing is he's so clear about his purpose, so clear about what he's about, that he remains king in the middle of a crisis where a man has his very life in his hands. Now, Jesus Christ at this point, if you'd seen the movie, at this point in the movie, has been beaten at the hands of the guards. Not the Roman guards. They're about to be turned over to the Roman guys, and they're going to whip him unmercifully. But before all this happens, in between the beating and the whipping, Jesus says to Pontius Pilate, who tells you that I'm the Son of God? Who tells you that I'm the King of Kings? Who tells you who I am? And Pontius Pilate, said, well, others. And he goes, well, what do you believe? And you see it in Pontius Pilate as he's agonizing, wanting to let this man go because this man doesn't talk like a criminal. He doesn't play like anybody else. He actually operates like a king. His purpose is so clear that he's about to rescue the very man who's trying him. He's about to rescue the very men who are beating him. He's about to rescue the very guys who gave him the trumped-up charges trying to kill his life from his own religious community. Jesus Christ's purpose is so clear that when you watch him walk out of the presence of Pontius Pilate, the guy who's his judge, and some of you know what it's like to be in front of a judge, that guy in front of that's the judge of your life, that judge is irrevocably changed as a result of seeing Jesus Christ and the encounter of him. Why? Clear purpose. Kings have clear purpose. Look at C. He realizes his purpose and he pursues it with a passion. I really love that. It means that you know what the inner voice of who you are is saying. You know what you're about. Guys, a king needs to know why he's alive. I mean, there's part of it. You understand if you're breathing, you have something to offer, right? You need to know why it is that you're alive, and that's your voice. That's what the calling is. You know what? It's a lot of times for moments of crisis. We don't like crisis. We don't. We want to avoid them. But there have been some things that have happened in my life where I realized that a lot of things that happened before have been building to this moment, and how I was learning to handle those and respond to those, very, very important as to what happens at that moment. There's a sense of your crisis will show you what you're supposed to manage, what you're about. But there's also a sense of, you know what? I think I was born for this. I think I was born to make a difference. See, we live in a very messed up forest, right? The world around us is doing all kinds of damage. And we come along as guys and pull from the shelf of our mind this king part of us, high nobility, clear purpose, clear understanding, and we begin to realize that, you know what, this is what I'm made for. This is why I'm here. So instead of us burying our head in the sand or running, when we find ourselves in the middle of a difficult situation, we actually see it as an opportunity, the opportunity to turn this around in a very significant way. I'm told actually the word in Chinese for crisis and the word for opportunity are the same. So we understand this, it goes a long way. Look at the next one, D. Life will provide consequences for any manhood principles that are violated. The king believes that he doesn't have to figure out how to make people suffer. People will suffer. There are consequences for everything that we do that is not noble, right? So the king gets that. He understands that. So we're not trying to figure out how to hand out punishments. Years ago, I told my sons I would never punish them. I might discipline them. It's a different thing. It might look the same, but it's not. They don't have to pay for what they've done because they can't. That's like paying for a lie. How do you pay for it? It's out there. You can't pull it back in. It's like paying for a murder. How do you do it? The person's dead. You can't pull it back, right? But what you can do is you can begin to say, I will learn and not do that again. That's discipline. That's the way it needs to be done. But you know what's interesting? Most of the times in my son's life, in my life, in the lives of people around me that I care about, I'd have to figure out the consequences that came right to them. There are consequences. Kings believe there are consequences for choices that we make. And when we understand that, it changes just about everything. The last one is this. He refuses to make excuses for his actions. He refuses to make excuses for his actions. There's a moment in U.S. history, there's a movie made about it called Black Hawk Down, where Thomas Matthews, who's a U.S. Army colonel, was in charge of this task force of Rangers that were working with the UN in Mogadishu, Somalia. On a certain day, they were supposed to capture some warlords, and on this mission led by the UN, there were some vehicles shot down to the sky, some of our guys. Over the next period of hours, 18 American soldiers will be dead, 500 people from Somalia will be dead in the streets as the battle rages. It's an amazing fight for the hearts and lives, leaving no man behind, rescuing men, rescuing to go. I mean, everything about it is a series of blunders that started it, not led by this colonel. His job is to solve it. He talks of this in the interview later on. He's now retired, and he's talking about these moments in his life. And he says some words that are very powerful that shows you what a king believes about a moment of great crisis. Here's what he said. These are his quotes. That was my crisis. That point in time as a commander of that aviation force, the leader in charge. What are you going to do? You're out of time. You have a situation in your face. I don't know how I knew. I'll just tell you that in my mind's eye, every decision I made, I felt was crystal clear. You hear it? You hear this, King? He's saying, for this moment I was born. Everything that's gone to this moment is building to this moment. There is something so incredible about a man who realizes that if I don't do my job, it will not just cost 18 men their lives, it'll cost hundreds. He hits this moment where he says, I knew what to do. Now, how did he know? Because he's been putting on the shelf of his mind king principles for a long time. I don't know the metrics or the reasons for all of that. I'll just tell you that it was clear in my mind's eye that what should be done at that moment. Here's why I think some of that is true. It's a function of experience. It's a function of time on the rock. I've been in the Army for 28 years. But I'll also say it's a function of where you came from. You see, on the shelf of our mind is a bunch of stuff that has come up through our whole lives that we have been filtering away and putting it in the right place. So at the moment when you need it, it can be pulled out. Like something that you've sorted in a vending machine that drops down in front of you. You can just pull this out. I need this now. He goes, I had it. Now listen to where he pulled this from. He said, I will say it's also a function of where you came from, what your family was, what your religion was, what's your base, your foundation, your cornerstone, that you grew up with. And they vary for leaders, but there are some common things here. It's off of those base things, because in a crisis, what you try to do is make your life as simple and as black and white as fast as you can, because it's serious. And because of that, you power down and revert to basics. You hear them, right? You can hear the intensity of this moment. That's what differentiates between a spandex male and a knight. A knight realizes he's born for such a moment. A spandex male actually is so disorganized in that moment that they make it worse. They add to the chaos. They add to the crisis. And what happens when we do this, we have to sometimes just back off and say, all right, if I let a spandex male rule in this place, everybody gets scared. I've seen it happen. You've seen it happen in your own life when you've acted not like a king when you needed to be able to handle an incredible situation like this. Listen to what else he says. In times of crisis, do the right thing. What is that exactly? You know? You just know. Do the right thing. You know what's not right, and oftentimes you can define this in negative sense. You can define what to do, what the correct leadership decision is by knowing that what you shouldn't do and what you wouldn't like to see be done. You got to know. You got to be able to sort. This is all about sorting, right? He actually is now starting to pull from his warrior. He's pulling from his lover. He's pulling from his friend. I mean, everything is being pulled off the shelves, and it's all being controlled by this moment as a king that he realizes this is what I was born for. Leaders have self-confidence. They get it by being comfortable in their own skin. They get comfortable in their own skin by being grounded emotionally, being supportive of others, and having the freedom, and having had the freedom to fail. It's easy to say, he said, but leaders need to remain calm during conditions of stress, chaos, and rapid change. If anyone can prepare in advance for the possibility of leadership crisis, if you would work on it now, then you'll have time prior to the crisis, and that's the way you'll behave at the time of the crisis, because you know no other way to behave. You know what he's saying? Everything up until that moment was going to be called on. All that I am, all that I've trained, all that I've desired, everything we've talked about these last 12 weeks to this week is all building up to this moment. Now the key is, have you sorted the mind, the shelves of your mind correctly so that when you need it, you can be pulling what you need? He does that. when you watch it, when you watch the movie, you just get blown away by these guys' willingness to rescue other guys, to fight for their own lives, to protect as many lives as they can, try to protect innocents while trying to get the guilty taken care of. I mean, all this stuff is happening, and this guy, his job is to say, I don't have a second chance. There's no do-over here. I want you to start to approach life that way. No do-overs. And we are men of influence. So don't think, oh, I just screwed up this time and I'll make it over. Now, guys, I will also tell you, we'll always say this, brand new page today, brand new opportunity. So everything you've done till now, you get to start over. But I want you to have a mental attitude of, it's not a do-over day. This is the day that counts. This is what it's all about. You know, it's interesting. Everybody that's had something surprising happen to them that they would call tragic or weren't ready for it, usually will say, boy, if I had only known, I would have. Well, you know. Treat each day as a king. Nobility, principles in action, all right? Let's go back to that workbook. Look at number 3, the characteristics of a king. Here's the characteristics of a king. And to be honest with you, if you can see what some of your beliefs are as a king and how you operate, one of the things you'll understand is how do I operate as a father? How do I do this as a father? So here's some characteristics. He is compassionate, but he expects right behavior. Let me give you a king direction, I think. I would never kick one of my children out of our home, no matter what they did. However, I would also let them know that if they did certain behaviors, they were choosing to leave. Now, on the outward appearance, it appears the exact same thing would have taken place. I kicked them out. No, I'll look them straight in the eye and say, you've chosen to not stay within the guidelines of our family. You've chosen not to stay within the guidelines of what is safe and good for those around you. So you are now choosing to step out of our home. Now, I might assist you in that choice, but I didn't choose to have you leave. You chose to leave. That means, what does that mean? It always means redemption is possible. You want to choose to stay? Stay within the system. Stay within the guidelines. Kings really important that you get this if you're going to be a father. You have to be protective and guiding, understanding, and moving them forward. It's so often, guys, I find that kids are raising their parents more than parents are raising their kids. And it's because I think we get this idea of I want to be their buddy and their friend. And they can have buddies and friends. And there are times, I'll tell you now, I think with my sons, they're all at that place where they're all at that friend stage because for the most part I've done raising all of them. But one of the things that's interesting is along the way, they also have tons of other buddies and friends. My job is to prepare them to be the man, a better man than I was. So they're not doing do-overs, right? They're not having to say, oh, I wish I'd done my marriage differently in the early years, right? Now, if you understand that principle as a father, then you understand B, failure is tolerable, but only when it's owned and the consequences of the failures are accepted. You got to teach those around you to say, you know what, I'm responsible. When I fail, I'll take responsibility and I'll clean it up. You remember, now we're going to talk about excuses here in a second, but it's really important to understand the danger of that whole area. Look at C. He remains consistent and knowingly accepts his responsibility for modeling or mentoring others. One of the things that we have to grasp is that if I'm going to be consistent, I'm going to say, let's just say, for example, I value all people. That's actually one of my beliefs as a king. All people are valuable. That means that my enemies are valuable. When I get that mentality, it changes how I look at people. People in the room, people in my life that have hurt me, it changes everything. Well, am I consistent with that? Am I thinking that through? Am I remaining consistent knowing that I'm going to have to mentor others what I believe? And so do my kids see me valuing life? Sometimes when I drive, I get annoyed at slow drivers, and it would appear that I don't value the person in the car in front of me. And my guys are watching that. The people around me watch that and wonder, am I consistent as a king? Small crisis, small one. Somebody driving slow and you're late. How you manage that will have a lot to do with how you manage the big crisis. The cool part about this shelf as a king is when you pull it off and you say, you know what, if I just grabbed that one, it would have made a difference in this little one. You'll be so ready for the big one when you start to learn this. It works out real well. D, he has a social consciousness and is intolerant of injustice. You will not be content with those things that in our culture in the forest where innocents are being taken out. Kings fight for others. I think you're picking this up, right? King is not about you. It's not about you walking in and going, I'm the royal guy. It's all about me and who I am, and everybody gets to see me, and it's all, look at here, I'm the king. Whoa. No. The king is actually about the fact that there are people behind you. The king is about those that are wounded. So when Jesus goes to the cross in the Passion, when he goes there, it's about his enemies. He's going there, right? It's about those who are needy that are going there. He's going there. It's about those who can't save themselves. He's going there for. That's king, right? That's what we do. So guys, when you get this attitude of, it's all about me today, I'm home, the king's here, you're not even in the zone. You're so spandex at that point, you wouldn't even know what anybody would know what a king looks like. A king is somebody whose servant leads because he realizes that injustice is intolerable. I got to make a difference. It's on us. Crisis is to be managed by us. Look at the next one. If we understand this, I love this one. The characteristics of a king has this personal motto. If you only remember 3 words from this motto, you'd be doing really well. Maintain the strength of your character, the integrity of your actions, and the power of your choosing. Every word you just wrote down, character, integrity, and choosing, remember that. That's going to help you a great deal to understand what it means to be a man that is a king. I'm going to walk through life making choices. I'm going to walk through life with integrity. I'm going to walk through life with character that people are drawn to. Jesus Christ is sleeping in a boat as the disciples are going across this water. These guys are used to being on the water. That's what their careers were. And they're in the middle of a storm. They think they're going to die. Jesus is sleeping. They're up. They're ticked. They're going, why aren't you responding to us? Why aren't you just taking care of us? You know, it's interesting. He's calm. You know why he's calm? Because Jesus gets something that these guys are missing. Roman numeral number 4. How does a king respond in crisis? He expects a crisis to come. So when it does, he does not panic. When it comes, but instead he looks for personal growth opportunities hidden within the crisis in order to improve himself. Jesus Christ is sitting here going, got a storm. Okay. Now, he's aware of his purpose. He's aware of rescuing others. He's aware of the fact that there are guys around him he's going to care for. He's aware of a lot of things. He's also aware of the fact that he knows deeply the one who controls storms. You know, God the Father, he's God, he's very connected. So as a result of that, I'm going to give you a cool definition of fear. Look at this. He understands that fear process and knows that fear is only, write this down, don't ever forget this one, false events appearing real. False events appearing real. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and just, we're all worried about a bunch of stuff? They're false events. They're not real. They appear real. And so we become afraid, we become frozen. Leaders can't do that. There's always something going on around you that you can't trust is true. So what you do is you say, pull off the shelf, off of the experience of your life, what do you know to be true? And how do you think? How do you react? Look at the next one. He believes in his strengths, his viewpoints, and social support systems, which gives him optimism in any situation. You know what's interesting is that as I've spoken into the lives of my sons, guess what they're now doing? They're speaking into my life. When we hit a crisis as a family in Caleb's life, each one of my guys rose to the top. Seth was the glue of our family. Caleb was a man on every level, a knight on every level. Joel, going through his own personal crisis, fought for us in every way he could. And Josh, my oldest son, called every day, all the time, even though he was many miles away, checking, seeing, encouraging. Matter of fact, I will tell you, there were moments when I felt like I just turned over the mantle of control, care of my family to him, as I felt like I was personally crashing at different times. One of the things that's really cool is a man knows what he has around him, what kind of resources. You king, you got to know. It'll give you the maximum optimism in any situation. You're going to face a crisis. That's what you're here for. D, he realizes that it is not a crisis to God. Guys, God's never out of control. He's not ever going, oh my goodness, what just happened over there? Where did that just come from? And what God's not in crisis mode. So what you and I feel is a crisis, God doesn't see as a crisis. So you go to him and say, God, give me your perspective. It'll change how I am fearing to suddenly get to understand what's real, what's going on. You got to know what's going on around you. Kings are fun to have in a room. Kings are what make you feel like, man, I'm just so glad they're here in any situation. You should never create tension when you enter a room. You should always create the possibility of we are better off. Now, the person you might have to confront might feel some tension. But basically, a room is always changed by how you and I do life. I'm just going to give you these, and I'm going to tell you a story. Here are the steps to solving a crisis. Become aware of the total problem and feel its implications. Become aware of the total problem and feel its implications. B, define and study the problem. Okay, you got to feel what's going on, define and study the problem. Give it a name. Say, here's what the problem is. Map out the solution. Take steps to say, here's what I'm going to do to map out the solution to it. And before I give you the last one, my dad and I went to an Army-Navy game. And here near Philadelphia, every year the Army-Navy game takes place between the two branches of the military, the Annapolis and West Point, and they always have this game. And my dad knew I loved football. He didn't really like football that much. He got tickets. We got center of the field at Franklin Field, but we stood behind the midshipmen, so we never sat the entire game. It rained the entire game. My dad does not like football, doesn't like to stand, doesn't like rain. We got out of the game, and there was a massive traffic jam. Sat in the parking lot, did not move for over an hour and 15 minutes. My dad did not like to sit. We got on the East River Drive, trying to get away from the traffic, and we hit a curb and cut a tire and got a flat tire. Now we're on East River Drive, a dangerous road, cars whipping by us, changing a flat tire in the pouring rain. You want to know why I remember that day as one of the best days of my life? I think I was like 11. My dad didn't get mad once. Didn't get mad once. Maybe it's because he would have gotten mad at other times. He didn't get mad that time. Maybe it's because I've seen myself get mad in silly situations like that. But as a kid, he was like royalty to me that day. It was before that change in his life I told you about that occurred a couple years later. But it was this magic moment where I just looked at my dad and went, wow. Because he's mapped it out, he's calm, he's thinking this through. Look at letter D, it'll help you. Use all of your resources to solve it. You have positional, you have knowledge, you have relational, you have personal, you have spiritual. What you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to take all that I am. I have the authority, positional. I have all these things around me, relational. I have all these things. I have the spiritual. I have the core. I have all that I am, right? You know what that does when you kind of pull it all together and you've named what your problem is, you kind of mapped out the solution, you've looked at all the things that you're feeling, and you go, okay, now what do I have? What are my resources? Who do I have as a man? It's like we suddenly pull out of the mind's eye of who we are, and we say, you know what, I know how to handle this. I know what I'm going to do. And when we do that, we hit this level of nobility which draws people to us. And if they're drawn to us properly and you're connected properly to God, you will draw people to God. In one of the final scenes in the movie The Passion, Christ has been beaten within an inch of his life, carried this heavy cross up his hill, is about to be impaled with nails to this cross. And as he's there, he drops the cross in exhaustion to the ground, and he falls on the ground on top of all the scars and everything that's been beaten. And then he gets up and he crawls to the cross. I mean, crawls to it. No man going to be executed crawls to the place where he's going to be executed, right? You know that. Not him. He was clear about his purpose. He was clear about his resources. He was clear about who was behind the cross that needed to be rescued. He was clear about you and I. He was clear about so many things at that point because for that moment, he was wired and built. He changed the world that day. He rescued the world. He will die for our sins and beat it 3 days later, rise from the dead. And I think I want us to realize that when he models it, when he's in the middle of the storm and all the guys are scared and he just says to the water, be quiet, and he says, what are you guys scared of? When he goes to the cross and he says, I will cover this for you. When he does these things, it's because he's clear about his purpose. I believe that we're becoming clear about ours. I think you're actually going to look at the difficult situations of a day very, very differently and say, what am I learning? What part of the shelf of King do I need to pull from so that I take the moral high ground, I take nobility to the next level? I want you to understand that I honestly believe that Jesus Christ came and not only gave his life so that we could live with him eternally, he gave his life so we could be changed, different men, different people. Why don't we honor him by being so? Nobility, high ground, King. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for meeting us, caring for us, valuing us, rescuing us, and giving us the opportunity to do the same. You've managed crisis after crisis and cared for us. Help us to manage those same things in honor and delight of how you've changed us and what you're doing. May our core come together. May we understand that we were made for a moment in history, a moment in time, whether it's the next moment or the next moment after that, where a crisis takes place, that we will respond as a king. High ground, nobility. Thanks for helping us. In Christ's name we pray.